and welcome to Encouraging Leadership, conversations that mobilize today's women leaders, with your host, Ann Miner. Meet leaders who share their observations, knowledge, insight, and perspectives to mobilize you to apply your own leadership in business and in life. Here's your host, Ann Miner.
Welcome to Encouraging Leadership, conversations to mobilize today's women leaders. I'm Ann Miner, your host, and today I have with me Ellen Voie. Ellen is the president and CEO at Women in Trucking Association, Inc. She founded this nonprofit organization to encourage and support women in the trucking industry. The mission is to make women aware of career opportunities and to mentor and assist them as they become more successful in their roles. Women in Trucking is not limited to women only, as 17% of its members are men who believe in the association's goals. Ellen, welcome.
Thank you, Ann. It's nice to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And let's start off by having you give us a bit of background on what led you to take the lead in forming Women in Trucking.
Well, it was about almost 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years next March. I was working for a large trucking company, and my job was manager of recruiting and retention programs. And what that was involved corporate-level initiatives to attract and retain. And so we were focusing on specific groups. And those four groups were Hispanics, returning military, seniors, and women. And my job was to figure out how to bring more women into the industry, specifically as drivers. And at that time, I was getting my pilot's license, and I belonged to an association called Women in Aviation. So it struck me that there was no association for women in the trucking industry. So I put together a board of directors, got an attorney to get us all incorporated as a nonprofit, and here we are almost 10 years later with nearly 4,000 members around the globe who all support our mission to increase the percentage of women employed in the trucking industry.
Wow. So that was a pretty innovative thing for you to do, to start the association 10 years ago. And what progress have we made, Ellen, in that 10-year span? Well,
we still haven't passed 3%, or 3% of female, 3% of the drivers are women in Canada, and under 6% in the United States. So we're still not seeing a lot of women at the driver level. And in management, women only comprise about 14% of the leadership. But I know that we've brought a lot more women in both of those areas. The American Trucking Association said that last year, 28,000 more women became professional drivers. So we are making progress, but it's just not fast enough.
Right, and one of the areas of concentration for you, I know, is the professional driver level. And I noted that you mentioned there was a much higher percentage, at least double the percentage of women in management and up compared to those that have taken up a career in commercial truck driving. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think women, when I talk to women who are in the industry, most of them came into the industry inadvertently. They didn't decide that they wanted to work in the trucking industry, but there was an opening at a trucking company, or a friend brought them over. But to be a driver, you really have to, make that determination and attend some kind of training, a school or whatever. So it's a little different if you're work in marketing and there's an opening at a trucking company and you hadn't considered trucking, but then you go to the trucking company, you decide you like it, and you work your way up into a leadership position. So I think it's a little easier for women who who aren't focused on the actual driving itself.
So when you think about women in leadership and what it will take to bring more women into the leadership ranks, what actions do you think women need to take?
Well, we need to let women know that the trucking industry really does value the contributions that women bring. and that diversity really is a priority because we know that the more women we have, when we have a more diverse leadership team, men and women, decisions are made differently, and it's been proven that the net worth of the company and the bottom line, the income, increases when you have a more diverse leadership team. So, I mean, we just need to let women know that there are great jobs within the trucking industry. So if you go to school for, lots of things, even, let's say, accounting or, like I said, marketing or other areas, consider a job in the trucking industry because it's really not, it's not as male-dominated as people think it is. And it's not a good old boys network as much as it used to be. So diversity really is valued.
Right. And I can speak to that too because I'm sure you noticed at the Transportation Marketing and Sales Association conference that there was about an equal number of men and women in the audience. So that speaks to the welcoming nature of the industry at this moment in time, whether it has been historically or not. Now, what would you say are the leadership secrets that you would like to share with women and men who are interested in pursuing a career in leadership?
Well, I believe that we have to be bold. I mean, that's the name of this program, bold. And we have to speak up. We can't be afraid to participate in the conversation. And if we have great ideas, we need to, let them be known and make sure that we take credit for them because a lot of times women don't say, hey, I did this. We want to get along. We like collaboration. But we need to step up and say, you know what? That was my idea. I think we should move forward on this. I also think that we should, my motto is do something that scares you. Go outside of your comfort zone and maybe try a role in transportation that you might not have thought of. Like women make great safety directors, and they're always looking for someone in charge of safety at a trucking company. There's lots of opportunities to move up the hierarchy and try other things, even if you aren't certain that you might like it or you aren't certain that you are totally qualified. Men will apply for a job when they feel, or a position when they feel that they have about 60% of the qualifications, but women wait until they feel they meet 100% of the qualifications. Well, you know what? Go for it at 60 or 70% of the qualifications and say, I can learn the rest. I can, that will come later. So I think we need to be bold. We need to be assertive, and we need to, try new things.
Well, that is so interesting. One of my other guests said the following: if you have all of the criteria, all 10 of the qualifications that are being required, you're already overqualified for the position.
I like that.
Very, very interesting. And, it makes sense if you think about it. If you already know how to do everything that is required for that particular position, you're not growing. You're stepping into something you already know how to do.
That's true. And you're not pushing yourself to, go beyond your limits and try be a little bit risky.
Well, exactly. And I think that, those who are looking at the transportation sector might not be as familiar with what all transportation encompasses. We certainly have talked about the professional or commercial truck driver. We've talked about other leadership positions within the transportation sector. But do people really realize that how fundamental transportation, and in particular trucking, is to the sustainability of our economy? I bet you could speak to that.
And you're right. When you see that gallon of milk on the grocery store shelf, people don't make the connection that it came on a truck. They see the trucks on the highway, and they don't realize that to get that gallon of milk there took a lot of people, not just the professional driver, but it took everyone from the engineer who designed that truck to, the truck stop component where you get the fuel and you get repairs. And I mean, a lot of things go into getting that gallon of milk on the grocery store shelf. And people just don't correlate that gallon of milk with the trucks out on the road. And I think we as an industry don't do a good enough job in saying we are so important that if the trucking industry decided to take a day off, you wouldn't have groceries, you wouldn't have gas, you wouldn't have, you wouldn't be able to go shopping. It would really affect the economy. It would shut the economy down.
Right. And I think actually that farmers even do a better job of making themselves visible as an essential component of, human survival. And by comparison, they're a much smaller proportion of the population. Tell us some of the statistics about how many people that are employed in the trucking industry.
Well, I've heard that 1 out of 14 people are somehow employed in the trucking industry. And here in Wisconsin, trucking is very, very important. We've got some very large trucking companies. So a lot of people in the state of Wisconsin are, more familiar with the industry as a whole. But it's massive. I recently went to a conference that was just warehousing. And, I mean, there's a conference just for the logistics part, brokers. And, I mean, there's so many people who make up the trucking industry that all those little pieces together make a huge, huge group of very important people who move the country.
Right, and the essential nature of this industry makes it a leading indicator of our economic health and well-being, does it not?
Oh, that's true. If the housing industry starts slowing down, then you're going to see that affect the flatbed component. Or if fuel prices go up and people are buying less fuel, then you're going to see that affecting the tank trucks and things like that. So it is a leading indicator. And if something starts happening with the economy, trucking is affected right up front.
Right. So when people think about trucking and think about transportation, you need to think about what really keeps our nations, both of our nations, moving and living and working and all of the above. And so what do you think the industry can do to raise the level of awareness and appreciation of the contribution that you make?
Well, I can tell you some of the things that Women in Trucking is doing. We actually have an image team, and the image team goes out and talks to regulators and legislators and gives them ride-alongs. Next month, we're giving our United States Senator a ride-along because, you know what, they're making laws that affect this industry, so they should actually get the chance to talk to a driver and ride in a truck. But other things that we need to do, we try to get our drivers out in the public. So we've had a driver featured in Oprah magazine. We try to get them on TV shows. We had a driver on Dr. Oz talking about health and safety, and we need to get them out there. And so we're working on. We came up with a transportation patch, Girl Scout or Girl Guides, as you call them in Canada, a patch so that when you do an event, the girls can earn their patch in transportation and learn about the trucking industry and do some little geography type things and that sort of thing. It's introducing them at an early age. And I'm working on this, Anne. I'm going to get a truck driver Barbie doll. I'm insistent on that because why can't little girls, have a Barbie doll that is a truck driver? We just need to expose people to the industry so that they get a better understanding of some of the opportunities that we have in transportation.
Well, exactly. And one of the things, I very recently got to sit in the cab myself. And what I noticed was how many different things in the cab could be adjusted to suit, my body size, shape, configuration. And I think that, that's another thing that hasn't been fully appreciated is that women are moving into this industry and are being acknowledged, and that technologies and other aspects of the business are being adjusted to accommodate them.
That's right. We work with, had a little technical issue there. We actually work with the truck cab designers on ergonomics and truck cab design, which is amazing because they're very receptive to changing the seats, the seat belts, the dash, the steps, things like that. They really do want to make sure that women are just as comfortable driving a truck as men are, and smaller people too. Because if you have shorter legs, shorter arms, which women typically do, wider hips, then the truck needs to be just as comfortable regardless of who's sitting behind the wheel. So that is very important.
And then there have been changes at all of the aspects of the business. So at the truck stops, for example, there have been changes made to accommodate.
They're very sensitive about safety, and for women, that is a higher priority. A lot of women are very concerned about their safety at the truck stop or on the road. So truck stops are trying to accommodate that by more lighting, security, fencing, things like that. So we are trying to make the industry more or less challenging for the professional driver, male and female. But we still have a long ways to go because there still is. There are some challenges that women face out on the road, and if it's in regard to safety or ergonomics, or maybe even finding gloves that fit them at a truck stop because their hands are smaller, or things like that. We still have a ways to go, but we're getting there. And what Women in Trucking does is speak up and say, these are the things that our members are concerned about, or our members have issues with, so there has to be changes made.
So you've really taken the leading voice position.
That's correct. And the other thing we want to be is a resource. We want people to come to us for information. So we have an anti-harassment guide. We have a recruiting guide on what do women look for in recruiting ads for professional drivers. We have a lot of data on our website and some resources. So we want people to say, hey, let's go to Women in Trucking and find out this information. One of the things that we recently came out with was the WIT Index. And first we did publicly traded trucking companies to see how many women they had in leadership and how many women served on the board of directors. But we're also working on an index that will measure how many female drivers, especially over-the-road drivers, and or what percentage, I should say, of female drivers, and then what percentage of women in management at trucking companies. So if you can't measure it, then you can't change it. So first we need to know where we are right now, and then we're going to measure it as we move forward.
So is the WIT Index available now?
The publicly traded WIT Index portion of it is on our website, and we're going to make that an annual event to review that. Out of the 15 companies, half of them had no women on their boards, and half of them had no women in leadership. But we're still working on, it's a massive undertaking to get the percentage of women in leadership at carriers. But we're working on it, so.
Right. And we need to shine a light on these facts. 50% with no women on their boards, 50% with no women in their leadership ranks is really concerning. I think that I might have mentioned to you that in Ontario in particular, there was, it's not really legislation, but it's a guideline that was published by the Ontario Securities Commission, specifically for publicly traded companies, not limited to transportation, of course, but it's called Comply or Explain, and it really addresses this absence of gender diversity within the board of directors. And progress is slow. Let me tell you, we got an update recently, and yes, it's slow. So both Canada and the US are at about 20% of the boards of director positions being occupied by women. So we have a ways to go to achieve the level of diversity that, for example, Norway has achieved at 36%. And even that is not even close to parity. So this year's International Women's Day theme was Pledge Parity, and I think we probably could pledge parity every year and keep working towards that
That's right. And last week I was at an event. It was a White House Council on Women and Girls, and it was called the United State of Women. And the speakers were amazing. Everyone from President Obama, Vice President Joe Biden, First Lady Michelle Obama, and everyone's goal was to bring more women into non-traditional careers and make more parity, more diversity in the leadership, but to open doors and offer opportunities to women who might not have thought of some of these, especially in transportation and or computers. I mean, they also have challenges of getting more women in coding and computers and things like that. So an interesting comment was when we stop calling them non-traditional careers, then we know that we've made it.
No, that is interesting, and that applies right across the STEM spectrum, the science, technology, engineering, and math. And that's been a focus at the educational level. But as you've mentioned, transportation has many opportunities that are outside of the cab of a vehicle. And whether that's because women are choosing to be mechanics or engineers or designers or accountants or specialists in HR or sales or administration, there are all of the positions that would exist in any company exist within a transportation company.
That's right. And you mentioned engineers. I know a lot of the engineers who design truck cabs and ergonomics who are women came out of the automotive industry. So they started designing cars and then moved into designing trucks. So, I mean, there are opportunities, but, we need to get people thinking about the trucking industry itself, or let's say the transportation supply chain management first, instead of thinking, instead of moving into it inadvertently.
Yes, I appreciate that comment about people sort of falling into whatever their career path is. And we see that often people are what we call accidental leaders, that somehow someone spotted them and maybe advanced them or pressed upon them leadership responsibilities without perhaps that person having chosen a leadership path. Now, do you have some advice for an accidental leader?
An accidental leader? Well, I guess my advice would be is to go for it. When opportunities are presented, go for it. Whether you feel that you have all the qualifications or not, right? But to try new things and maybe, look outside of, if you're not in the transportation industry and you're listening to this show, look at some of the opportunities in transportation and consider whether it's marketing or accounting or safety or a technician. Consider how your skills can benefit the transportation industry, because it is a great industry. And I think when people come into the trucking environment, they don't leave because they love it. So you feel very fulfilled when you know that you're making a difference, because it is such an important aspect of the economy.
Exactly. So tell me what's ahead for Ellen and for Women in Trucking. Where do you see taking the organization next?
Well, last year we had our very first conference, which I was thrilled, and you attended, and we were hoping for 200 people, and we had 350. So this year, in November, we'll have our second conference, and we're going to shoot for 500. So I see us, becoming more and more of an influence in the transportation industry, being more of a resource, and having more, increasing the percentage of women. I mean, that's simply our goal, is just to increase the percentage of women through all of our different programs. So that's my goal, and to see much more parity and much more diversity at both the driver level, the technical level, and the leadership group.
So that might be a way for someone who was thinking about transportation to get a sense of what it might be like. So they would get an opportunity to rub shoulders with people at all levels in the trucking industry in particular, and through the opportunity to converse with your exhibitors.
Well, that's true. And the reason people came, the number one reason people came to our conference, not just to learn, but to network, because that's so important, to meet other women who are involved in the transportation industry and to just learn from each other, collaborate, mentor, and have fun.
Right. So tell us about some of the speakers you have lined up for the upcoming conference.
Well, the ones we're working on is Valerie Young wrote a book called The Imposter Syndrome, so we're working on getting her there. And it's about women who are in leadership roles who might not raise their hand in a group of men because they, are a little unsure of themselves. And she talks about that and being confident. Another book I read recently was called Women Don't Ask, and it's about how we don't negotiate our salaries, we don't negotiate our raises enough. And so Sarah Lashever, her name is, the author, we're getting her to talk about, being bold and making sure that you're getting paid what you're worth. She talks about how female engineers straight out of college don't negotiate their very first salary, and their male counterparts end up already straight after graduation earning $4,000 to $6,000 a year more because they asked for it, they negotiated it. So over the course of their career, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars because you didn't start with a higher amount. So we've got some great speakers who will talk. We'll have drivers. We'll have a driver panel talking about some of the challenges drivers face. We usually have someone talking about recruiting, how to recruit women. We'll have an economist talk about the state of the economy. It'll be a lot of fun, and it'll be a great lineup. And we hope to get them all secured shortly. But it'll all be on our website, so people can check and see who we'll have there.
And why don't you share your website address with our listeners?
The website is pretty simple. It's womenintrucking.org.
So women in trucking with no dots, no dashes, and remember it's .org as opposed to some of the other extensions. ORG tells you it's an association, essentially. And what if our listeners would like to get in touch with you directly, Ellen? How would you like them to do that?
Well, they can call our toll-free number, which is 888-464-9482. And I'll repeat that, 888-464-9482. And if they have any questions about how to join, because we are a nonprofit, we're a dues-based organization, and we have corporate and individual members, so we encourage them, if they support our mission, to consider becoming a member. And then once they become a member, they'll get a welcome kit. We have a weekly newsletter online. We have a magazine that comes out 3 times a year, and they get invited to all of our networking events. So we hope that people would support us by becoming a member.
Right, and they can they join your Facebook group, or is that a private group?
No, anyone can join the Facebook group, and that's an amazing group. And we also have a LinkedIn group, and you just search for Women in Trucking Association, and you'll find it. But there's just about 10,000 people in the Facebook group and about 6,000 in our LinkedIn group. And we also have a Twitter handle, which is Women in Trucking.
Right. So listeners, those are great resources if you have a thought that this might be an industry you'd like to explore or a career path you'd like to pursue. And, the Acacia Institute is the sponsor of our show. And we have offered Women in Trucking scholarships for their members to attend our Aspiring Leaders level. And the students that are currently enrolled have been very, very enthusiastic about what they're learning and how they can take that experience back into their own companies to help foster their own leadership development, but also to encourage others. So that's one of the things that women do particularly well, or at least we think we do, is we like to raise everyone. So all of us can advance together. And Ellen, this is a moment for you to give us one last bit of advice for our listeners before we wrap up. So What words would you leave us with?
Well, I'm going to say do something every day that makes you a little nervous, a little scared, and it's outside of your comfort zone. Because if you don't push yourself, you'll never know what you're capable of achieving.
Well, hear, hear. So listeners, be bold, be brave, and make a difference in the world. Thank you so very much for being with us today, Ellen. Ellen Voie, President and CEO of Women in Trucking.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you for listening to Encouraging Leadership. To learn more about our host, Ann Miner, and the Acacia Institute, please visit acaciainstitute.com. Join us next week at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, for more Encouraging Leadership. In the meantime, be courageous.